The first moral principle that would result from these two hypothetical situations is the principle of greatest equal liberty, or the greatest equal liberty principle. And as the title suggests, this principle basically says that all members of society should be granted the most extensive liberties and freedoms possible while not violating in the process the equal liberties and freedoms of others. So, in other words, in society, people should be allowed to do whatever they want. They should be able to live their lives however they want. They should be free to do whatever they want, so long as in the process of doing that, they do not violate the equal freedoms and rights of other people. So, for instance, we may think about alcohol and drinking alcohol. And we can imagine the social contract theorist saying that, people should be free to drink alcohol as long as they do not violate the equal freedoms of others. So, for instance, if I get drunk at the bar and I get in my car and I get on the highway and I'm driving under the influence, that would be considered morally wrong according to the principle of greatest equal liberty, because I am essentially putting other people who are on the road in danger. And I cannot say on the one hand that I'm free to drive on the road, but then on the other hand be putting people who are also driving on the road and want to be free to drive on the road in danger, right? So I cannot be free to drive under the influence. I'm free to drive on the highway, and I'm free to drink alcohol. I'm even free to get drunk. But I'm not free to drive drunk, because doing so would violate the equal freedoms of other people who are driving on the road with me. I think that's a good example of this first moral principle. You can also apply this first moral principle perhaps to same-sex marriage. If we believe that same-sex marriage does not, cause harm to society, and that when two people of the same sex get married, that they're not violating the freedoms of other people, right? Like they're not forcing heterosexuals to be involved in their homosexual marriage. Then we would think that according to social contract theory and this first principle of greatest equal liberty, that same-sex couples should have the equal liberty, the equal freedom to be married, so long as they're not violating the equal freedoms of others in the process. And generally we don't think that heterosexuals who are getting married violate the freedoms of others in the process. So perhaps the social contract theorist would also say that it's not clear why homosexuals should be prohibited from getting married. They should have this equal liberty based on the equal liberty principle, the greatest equal liberty principle. The second moral principle that would be derived from the two hypothetical situations is called, by John Rawls, the differences principle. And the idea here is that any inequalities in society, that is to say, any differences among members of society, ultimately need to be arranged so that, number one, the positions that those inequalities are attached to are open to all. So, for instance, presumably politicians get paid more than janitors. However, in society, according to the differences principle, it has to be possible for the janitor to become the president. There can't be any laws that prohibit the janitor from becoming the president just because he's the janitor, or just because he's, for instance, a member of the lower caste. The lower class. You can't say, according to this principle of social contract theory, that just because you're born into the lower class, you must stay there. In contrast, social contract theory says, if you're born into the lower class, you ought to have opportunities that make it possible for you to raise to the middle class or even the upper class. So these inequalities have to be open to all. The second part of this principle is that any inequalities need to be arranged so that they ultimately benefit all members of society. So, for instance, again, presumably a politician has more power and more money than someone in the lower class. But according to the differences principle, that power and that money that the politician makes ultimately needs to benefit all other members of society. I like to think of taxes here, and the idea that we should tax the rich more than the poor, I think fits very well with the differences principle, right? The differences principle is saying, look, if there's an inequality in the income, in the wealth of people in society, then ultimately that inequality needs to work to the benefit of all members of society. So, of course, if I'm wealthy, that works in my benefit, so I'm taken care of. But my wealth needs to take care of my neighbors and the people who are living in poverty as well. And how is that done? I get taxed perhaps at a higher rate than someone in the middle class or than someone in the lower class. So ultimately, my wealth ends up benefiting all other members of society who take advantage of the tax system and who benefit from my taxes. And so that's true of any inequality in society, whether it's power, money, knowledge. Ultimately, those inequalities need to work to the benefit of every single member of society.